Nation in my game review for Boise State versus Wyoming. Should fans be concerned right now? Where does Boise State stand in regard to the playoffs after a close win? I do want to emphasize that it was a win because it almost was not. So fans should be celebrating that element. But there are a lot of causes for concern right now. And where does Boise State find themselves in the playoff race after a close win and a wild week in college football? We're going to go through both of those questions. We're going to look at the offense, the defense, and the special teams. And then we're also going to look at how Boise State performed against my keys to the game. We'll grade all of those areas. So starting off with the offense, this was a Boise State team that offensively did not perform the way that fans expected them to. As an offense has been averaging over 40 points a game coming into this one, 50-plus points, especially in the first half of the season, especially when they're at home. But this was an offense that did not show up for large segments of this game. I know for the score prediction challenge, that definitely threw a lot of people off. Most people were actually pretty close defensively, giving up the 13 points. It's what most people close around that number were predicting. But nobody really got close. Nobody really truly won the score prediction challenge this week. Jerez Bear 9502 was the closest with a prediction of 30-17. But again, everybody predicted a blowout in this matchup, and we didn't see it. And we have to ask why. Well, the biggest reason that Boise State's offense struggled in this one was its offensive line. It's an offensive line that's been extremely banged up. They did have a key player back and carry on, finally able to come back after that injury. But they were without Hall Schmidt. It was the sixth lineup that Boise State had used on the offensive line this season. And I will say this first and foremost, when it comes to this offensive line, compared to what Boise State's seen the previous years, I mean, last year's was good. The year before that was okay. But going into maybe the first three seasons, 2019 through about 2022, I would have taken this offensive line performance for what we are seeing compared to especially a lot of those other ones with the injuries that are mounting. So what Boise State has been able to do despite the injuries, the depth that they have been able to show in their offensive line has been truly impressive. And so I don't want to negate the impact this offensive line has had and the struggles that they are going through. I think that we all need to understand that, but they are starting to show the pass rush defense really hard at protecting, hard job of protecting the quarterback this game. 2 sacks against Maddox Madsen, and one of those was on a blindside sack. He was constantly under pressure. He was constantly having to roll out of the pocket. He did not look or feel comfortable in that pocket today. And Wyoming, yeah, they were coming after them, but this isn't like it's an elite Wyoming defense. This isn't the Craig Bowl defenses of years past. This is a Wyoming defense that, for the most part, is pretty average overall. And they came after Maddox Madsen with a fury today, and they got through several times. There were actually 3 sacks overall, but one of them was wiped out by a penalty by Wyoming. So again, a quarterback that's not been sacked very much at all this season had 2 sacks in this game, second game in a row with 2 sacks. Again, that number is low, but it definitely had an impact, not just when they got through, but even in the times that they didn't, in the chemistry that we saw in this Boise State offense in the passing game. The second issue was in the rushing offense for Boise State. The run blocking this game at times was really good. There were a couple of great plays there. That 62-yard run or 61-yard run by Ashton Genty, which was right up the middle, an area that fans have been begging Dirk Cutter to avoid. Well, he proved them wrong, at least on that play, with a 61-yard run straight up the middle, beautifully blocked. He was wide open. I don't believe he was touched on that play. He's, of course, breaking tackles is especially, but he didn't have to in that game, in that run. They also had another run later on where he had 24 yards, second drive right after the 61-yard run, so the third drive overall. A 24-yard run straight up the middle again. So at times, this Boise State offensive line performed very well. However, you could definitely see that there was a lack of chemistry. Multiple offensive penalties, multiple holding calls for Boise State, especially in the second half, that killed a couple of promising drives. And Boise State's offensive line just looked out of sorts in this matchup. And I think that the injuries are just starting to mount a little bit. The one area, if besides quarterback, that you need consistency as an offense is the offensive line. There's only so much you can do, especially when you have defenses that are crowding that line of scrimmage, that are sending everything they have at you to try and rattle the quarterback and stop the running back, the core of this offense. You have to have consistency there, and there's only so much you can do against a pressure like that if you don't have the building blocks, if you don't have the playmakers that you usually would, and if you don't have that shared mental model on that offensive line. Because again, the offensive line is not just about individual performances. Every single player has to do exactly the right thing, and if one person messes up, the entire enterprise is for naught, and you end up with a lost yardage for the quarterback, or a tackle at the line for the running back. This is a Boise State offensive line that has struggled this year with the injuries, and they've played really well, but it's starting to catch up to them. And I think that was the biggest impactor. It is hard to analyze this game because this is not the performance that you should be seeing out of this Boise State team. And yes, every single team is giving their best shot against the king. They want to knock him off his throne in his path to the CFP. And so every team is going to give you their absolute best shot. And this was the best performance from Wyoming that we have seen all season. This is a Wyoming team that 2 games ago gave up over 400 yards on the ground against New Mexico. Last week, over 240 plus versus Colorado State. And in this game, only 185 yards rushing. They clearly were selling out against Boise State. But the problem is that it wasn't like what we saw versus San Diego State. It wasn't even what we saw at times versus San Jose State. They sold out to stop the run, but Boise State wasn't efficient at getting the ball through the air this game. 14 out of 26, 167 yards, 2 sacks, 5 carries for -6 yards. It's only his second game of negative yardage for Maddox Madsen. He did have a couple of good runs here and there, but not enough to offset the sack yardage, which was significant. 2 6+ yard sacks that hurt Boise State and knocked them out of abilities to go down and score touchdowns. And it was a Boise State offense that just felt out of tune overall. I'm not going to put it entirely on Maddox Madsen. I'm not going to put it entirely on the offensive line or the wide receivers. There were some key drops, especially in the first half. Maddox Madsen was off in the first half as well, throwing the ball, even in the second half. The couple of times where, had Matt Lauder open and missed him. Matt Lauder could have maybe gotten the ball, but it was a tough pass to go and get. There was a couple of times that wide receivers dropped the passes. Lauder had a drop in the first half. Strawn dropped a ball on 3rd and 4. That would have been a key conversion after Boise State scored a touchdown the previous drive to keep that drive going. That would have, I think, maybe changed the momentum of this game. And it was a drop pass. It was a good throw of Max Madsen, but a drop pass. And at times there just wasn't anybody open. Wyoming, for their credit, even with their selling out at times to stop the run, did a strong job of just stopping the wide receivers. There just wasn't anybody to throw to on a lot of these opportunities. And I don't know if that goes back to the play calls that Boise State is coming up with. I think that they are not using the running backs efficiently in the passing game. We're not seeing the screen used efficiently. I mean, Dirk Cutter coming in the season, as everybody talked about, is how strong he is calling the screens. We really haven't seen that called. I don't think that Boise State was running a vanilla offense in this one. I thought that they were trying to mix it up. We saw some great play action passes that worked for the most part. We saw some Boise State attempting to run it outside. We saw some sweeps that didn't work, but we did see Boise State attempting to bring variety to this offense. They're still not using the option like I think they could, but there was an attempt by Boise State to bring some variety to this offense, and just nothing was working. And a big part of that, I think, again, was Wyoming's ability to stop Ashton Jeanty for a large part of this one. You had 3 drives in the first half where Ashton Jeanty being stopped, and then a dropped pass for 2 of them, and then an incomplete pass for a third one led to a 3rd and long that Maddox Madsen was unable to convert, an incomplete pass. You saw Wyoming really doing a great job overall of slowing down and stopping Ashton Jeanty. He still bursts out for a 61-yard run and a 24-yard run. But in the first half, Boise State only had 88 yards rushing. And if you take out the 24 yards and the 61-yard runs by Ashton Jeanty, that's pretty much the entire that's it. That's all of your rushing yards, and they added some sack yards on top. He had 2 good runs in the first half, but overall, Ashton Jeanty was stopped in this game, and that was a big factor. And part of it was the offensive line, and part of it was Ashton Jeanty still just not playing at 100%. It was an offense that I think should bring some cause for concern. I do. I think that the offensive line play, the way that Boise, at least with the lineups that Boise State has right now, I think should bring some cause for concern, especially if you factor in probably playing UNLV in the Mountain West Championship game at this point. And UNLV won their game this week. Colorado State lost versus Fresno State. And now, assuming that both of those teams just win out, or even if Colorado State drops another one, but they don't have to, assuming UNLV wins out and all they have to do is go out and play Utah State, I believe, they're going to be in and they'll be motivated. And they have a very, very good front seven. One of the best linebackers in the Mountain West in the group of five there in Woodard, who definitely wants a second crack at Ashton Jeanty. And the offensive line play that we saw tonight isn't going to cut it. Again, some great individual moments, but not consistency overall. Even in the second half by Boise State, there were, again, multiple penalties. The line blocking I thought was a little bit better in the second half, but it was wiped out by penalties. Drive number one, Maddox Madsen trying to do what Maddox Madsen does, which is lead 85-plus yard scoring drives. We've seen it so many times this season, and they looked like they were going to be able to do it, but then a penalty wipes out first down attempt there, puts Boise State in a negative yardage situation. Maddox Madsen and the offense able to convert that. A good pass and then a good run by Maddox Madsen able to convert. But then another penalty right afterwards. Another penalty forces a long third down attempt. Maddox Madsen off on that one. A low throw to Penry misses him, and Boise State forced to punt. Drive number two, holding on the pitch play, and now you're facing 1st and 20. And the worst case here is that also Ashton Jeanty's out of the game, and then you miss Louder on a off-target throw, and then miss on a 4th down a conversion attempt. Now Caples reacted like he was held defensively. I wasn't able to see a camera angle that showed where he was on the field in the first portion of his run, coming across the middle just towards the end at that point. If he was being held, the defender had let go. So the ball placement on that one a little bit off, and also potentially Caples held, but whatever the result, it resulted in a turnover on downs. And now Boise State is opening up the second half there, down 10-13, and Ashton Jeanty is out of the game. And this drive number 3 looked like it was playing pretty well, honestly, and then just unfortunately unable to complete on 3rd down. Nobody to throw the ball to in that situation. Max Madsen had some time, but there's just nobody open. And the biggest factor for this Boise State offense that I think is causing the coverage issues is, or the inability for wide receivers to get open, is that the deep ball's not a threat. The deep ball is not a factor for this Boise State offense, and I don't think it's because Maddox Madsen can't throw it, because we have seen him throw it. We've seen him throw it a couple times this season. We saw him throw it multiple times last year. The deep ball is in his repertoire, but for whatever reason, Boise State is not going to it. Even if it's an incompletion, Boise State should be attempting to push the ball deep down the field, because what you're seeing on these 3rd down attempts or these 2nd and long attempts is that all the defenders are stacked up within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage, and there is nowhere to throw the ball in a lot of these cases. Now, Maddox Madsen had some good throws. He had some really that was kind of a consistent trend. We see a good throw on the first part of the drive, and then Jeanty gets stopped, and then there's a drop or an incompletion, and then Boise State is forced to punt, and it just kind of continued to trickle down throughout this game. But Maddox Madsen still being able to beat this coverage sometimes, but the defense knows that the deep ball is not a threat for whatever reason, and right now I think it's a play calling issue. I think that Boise State has players that can go deep. We saw that last year. Strawn, what Bolt was able to do, and what we've been able to see Camper do at times this season. Boise State has some speedsters out here, long threat receivers, deep play guys that are tall and can go out and make some big plays, and Boise State's just not going after them, and they're just not calling the plays. And so I think right now this was a very weird game offensively. Boise State never got into a flow. The rhythm was off the whole time. Even when they did start to develop with rhythm, they had those penalties, which again shows, I think, the inconsistency on the offensive line. Again, thankfully, Ashton Jeanty, being Ashton Jeanty, comes back into the game after the injury that knocks him out, keeps him out on the sideline for 2 drives, goes into the injury tent. We don't know if he's going to come back, but then Boise State, they need him. When they need Ashton Jeanty, he comes out and he plays big, because again, he's playing this game for his teammates. The Heisman is a distant goal, but his immediate goal is every single game, and his long-term goal is for his teammates. And he comes back in on drive number 4. Jeanty has 50 yards on that drive. He breaks 2 long runs for 15 and 20, has another run for 15 plus, and then Dubar ends up putting it into the end zone. I don't know. I didn't understand that call. I think that Jeanty kind of earned the right to come in on and finish that drive, but he is clearly playing injured in that situation. A situation that I think a lot of running backs wouldn't have been playing in the game. And Ashton Jeanty, because of the inhuman product that he is, and because of just the play style and the character that he is, he came back in for his team and led them on that drive and was able to lead up to a score. So maybe he just physically wasn't in a position where you wanted to put 7 more hits on him right up there at the goal line where they're just crowded up, no ability to break free. So maybe that was a consideration and a factor there. But whatever the reason, Dubar ends up being able to push it in for a touchdown. And key on that drive is that Ashton-Jeanty actually had 2 stiff arms, 2 big stiff arms with his left arm, which is the one that's been injured since UNLV. So potentially maybe we're seeing Ashton-Jeanty's arm getting a little bit better. Obviously taking another injury today, this time lower body, looked like maybe an ankle, somewhere in that range. So hopefully that's not a factor going forward into next week when we'll need him to have a big game. But this was an offensive performance that was inconsistent at best and very poor at times. And again, I think a lot of it just goes down to the inconsistencies up front, which Boise State has been able to overcome. And we would have loved to have this offensive line in multiple past seasons. So again, the offensive line play isn't like it's terrible, but it is enough right now to throw Boise State off of their game, to throw the passing game of Maddox Madsen, make him uncomfortable in that pocket, and to prevent Ashton-Jeanty from being able to break out for some of these longer runs. Again, 19 carries, 169 yards, 8.9 yard average, and a touchdown, long of 61, his lowest carries total so far this season for games that he has played the entire game. Jean-Bray Dubar, 5 carries for 22 yards in some of Ashton-Jeanty's absence there, 4.4 yard average and a touchdown. I actually liked what I saw out of Jean-Bray Dubar. He's been injured this season, so he hasn't been able to have a major role. But coming in, I thought he played really, really well. Even in that one drive that Ashton-Jeanty was out, I thought Jean-Bray Dubar played well in that drive. Just unfortunate situation there. Maddox Madsen's flushed. He's tackled after about a 4-yard run. Dubar is tackled after about a 1 yard or 0 yard gain, and then just nobody throw to on 3rd down. But it wasn't like Boise State's offense fell apart as soon as Ashton-Jeanty left the game. They definitely show that they have some potential there, but obviously Ashton-Jeanty is the heart and soul of this offense, and he being healthy, I think, is going to be the biggest factor. Can he get healthy by the playoffs? Because we're not seeing what Boise State can produce in the playoffs right now. The injuries, we're going to get more players back. They mentioned that we might be getting our center back as well. So there's been a lot of injuries that hopefully Boise State's offensive line will look like the first half offensive line in the playoffs. Ashton-Jeanty, after a full 2+ weeks, maybe a month to recover after the Mountain West Championship game, he'll be healthy and ready to go. And then obviously Boise State's going to bring their best game plan. But the problem is, can they make it there? I mean, we're talking about playoff like it's a certainty, but it's not right now. Boise State's had 3 games in a row now. Well, maybe not in a row by total score production, but by closeness of the game for the majority of the matchup, because I'm also counting last week where Boise State, that game was in the balance all the way till basically the midway point in the 4th quarter. 3 games in a row where Boise State has not finished strong, or where they are not finishing the season strong. Obviously, San Jose State finishing in a flurry of points there at the end, but just not a Boise State team that has performed like we expected them to. They have stubbed their toes on some of these hurdles, and so far it hasn't been enough to trip them up. But you have to wonder, after the hits keep compounding, is there going to be a game where they just don't have enough in the tank? And is there going to be a game where Ashton-Jeanty just isn't able to come back in on drive number 4 after he's been out for 2 drives because he's hurt? And even despite the injury, how do you not give this guy the Heisman at this point? I mean, you have to be absolutely blind to what Ashton-Jeanty is doing statistically, but also what he is doing with everything around him, with the injuries on the offensive line, the injuries to himself, the fact that he's able to come in on drive number 4 and put Boise State basically in the end zone, not being the one to carry the ball in, but doing everything else to put Boise State there and winning this game. Boise State wins this game today because of Ashton-Jeanty. How many times is there going to become a game where he's not able to do that? Boise has to fix some things, and I think it goes back to first off, getting the deep passing ball game involved, and then secondarily, I think Boise State needs to start doing some things to help out this offensive line. Getting some more pitches on the outside, getting the screen game involved, getting the option play involved, just forcing the defense to consider some other things and simply just running full force into this offensive line. So Boise State needs to find a way to shore up the holes in their offensive line right now to prevent the flood from pouring in, because Oregon State, they're going to have this game circled. They just beat Washington State. And then UNLV. This is two games that are not going to be easy to end the season by any stretch of the imagination. And what we're seeing offensively for Boise State should certainly give you concern. However, the biggest concern for Boise State right now is their defense. To grade the offensive performance C+. The biggest concern for Boise State right now is their defense, which might seem weird to say considering that Boise State only gave up 13 points. However, this is not a Wyoming offense that has the passing game in their vocabulary per se. Now, for this Wyoming offense coming into this game, they were performing better with their backup who'd taken over the starting role, Caden Anderson, who'd thrown in 3 games for over 800 yards. He had been playing better, and he definitely showed against this Boise State offense. He was 9 of 14 for 116 yards. But this is not a Wyoming offense that just has deep threat wide receivers, that throws the ball down the field consistently. And Boise State got burned several times in this game. And it wasn't even when Anderson. I mean, yeah, Anderson's their better passing quarterback. But Anderson got hurt, had to leave the game in the second half, which was a huge boost for Boise State. Again, you never want a player to get hurt. And you never celebrate a player getting hurt, even if it's on the opposing team. However, that definitely changed the trajectory of this matchup. Wyoming, not the same team that they were in the first half. But in some areas, they were at times. Some deep balls allowed versus Svoboda, and I probably mispronounced his name. However, deep balls allowed for the second Wyoming quarterback here. That is just not what we've seen out of him this season. And Wyoming quarterback coming in, Svoboda, coming into this matchup, he was throwing at a rate that was 9 touchdowns, 10 picks coming into this season. He was throwing at a less than 50% passing completion. It was like a 45% or something like that passing completion percentage. And today, he was 6 of 13 for 87 yards total offense. He actually looked pretty good at times there in the second half. This is a Boise State defense that does not look the same without Alexander Tubner. And that does make sense. Obviously, he's your field general. He's your green dot. He's the quarterback of this defense. And if you lose your primary leader, you are going to struggle. And so I think that there is an element there that it's not unexpected. A couple of these plays, especially one of the deep balls that you could say was on McCoy, it didn't really look like it was on McCoy in that essence. The wide receiver was so wide open. It was 7-10 yards behind the defense. In fact, if they're able to actually if Svoboda doesn't underthrow the pass, it's probably a touchdown there. And Wyoming is now 17-10, and now Boise State scores to tie, and who knows where that would have gone. That was a huge moment there that it was an underthrow, because that should have been a touchdown. The wide receiver, it looked like broken coverage. We've seen elements of that so far. After Alexander Tubner went out, before Alexander Tubner got injured, this Boise State secondary was actually on the rise. I thought that they looked like they were plugging holes that had been issues earlier on. Yeah, they were still giving up yards here and there, but they were standing key on the main downs, and they weren't giving up as many deep opportunities. The Boise State secondary, while not necessarily being a core strength of this defense, definitely looked like it was headed towards a strength of some form, and certainly not a weakness. And the Boise State secondary that we've seen since Alexander Tubner went out has not been the same. There is talent back there. Obviously, Zion Washington, Ty Benefield, both those guys very, very talented at safety. But when you just don't have your leader back there organizing this defense and bringing all of the individual pieces that are strong together into one bundle that builds awareness, you're just going to have issues, and Boise State secondary has shown that. Now, the key that we saw throughout this game was Boise State, except for one drive, Boise State would give up a deep ball, but then they would stand strong. We've seen that a lot, I think, throughout this season. Boise State giving up big plays, but then making adjustments. And a lot of that today went down to Marco Navarani. He had two drives where he was almost individually responsible for forcing the punt or the turnover on downs. Drive number 3, a deep ball, this one time on Benefield, even though the pressure was really on and there was a big hit on the quarterback. There's a deep ball allowed, and then they allow a pretty good run as well. But after that, on 4th down, on 4th and 1, 4th and inches, Marco Navarani, he comes up and makes a huge tackle on the running back, One of those situations now, second game in a row where maybe a questionable decision not to go for the field goal inside of the 15, 20-yard line there. He came up and made a big play and stopped and forced a turnover. There's a couple of drives, a couple of moments here that you look at as game-changing moments. That one was one for sure. Again, if they don't get that, force that stop, now it's a 1-point score instead of a 4-point score, and maybe Wyoming plays their offense a little bit differently there on those last two drives, attempting to go for a field goal. I mean, especially there on drive number 4, they would have had an opportunity to potentially go for a long field goal, but they needed a touchdown, and so they went for a touchdown and ended up taking a sack. So that was key. The underthrow was key in the second half, but that play there on fourth down, and it wasn't, kind of a stupid trick play like we saw over San Diego State. It was a good solid play call, and Notre Dame was there to fill the hole. Again, stepping up big in the absence of Simpson. He was already having a big year there, but now that Simpson is gone, had been gone the last couple of games, and it hasn't been revealed why. There's kind of a long list. Hall Schmidt also out for the offense. A list of guys that are just out without any specific reason being given. So Simpson, another one of those guys this week, and the week before as well. But Notre Dame stepping up big and being able to make some big plays there. And then also drive number 5, another big run allowed. Benefield ended up having to make the tackle. That was something we kind of saw as a trend, was that the running backs, at least in the first half, were pretty consistently getting past the first line, even through the linebackers and secondary players, corners, nickels, safeties were having to come down and make the tackle. I think we've seen that the last couple of games. I definitely noted it last week versus San Jose State. I felt like we saw that at times versus Nevada. I feel like Boise State's run defense has started to deteriorate a little bit, and I don't know if that's just concerns about the passing defense, and so you're putting different players in different positions to try and make up for the issues Boise State's had in the secondary, maybe stepping back from the line a little bit. But again, that wouldn't necessarily excuse the front 7 there, the linebackers and the D line, from their role. And pretty consistently in the first half and in the previous games, we've seen running backs getting to the third level of the defense. Now, however, Boise State secondary doing a good job of not allowing any huge broken runs in this matchup. But that was, again, another situation. Drive number 5, big run. Benefield has to come up and make the tackle from his safety spot. But then Notre Dame has 2 huge tackles back-to-back, including on a third down screen that forces the punt there. So there was some great individual effort. Boise State definitely made up for their mistakes. But when you're looking at reasons for concern, should fans be concerned? I think you definitely, at least with Tubner out, you need to be concerned about this Boise State secondary ability to stop the pass, and specifically the deep ball. Again, that's not in Wyoming's wheelhouse normally. That's not their main threat. I had a friend who covers Wyoming who messaged me before the game and said Wyoming's about to get blown out. I think most people expected that, not just because of Boise State's offense, but I think that they expected Boise State's defense to perform well against this Wyoming team. And again, score-wise, they did, but there were a couple of big moments, a decision not to kick a field goal and a short throw that would have been the difference maker there in potentially giving Wyoming an opportunity to tie or take the lead there in the end, or having an opportunity just to win this game outright. This was a Boise State defensive performance overall that definitely made good adjustments in the second half. Second half, I thought, again, the primary quarterback, or at least the primary quarterback of the last 3 games, definitely their main passing threat being out helped. But Wyoming in the second half, they only had 14 yards rushing. They had 102 yards rushing in the first half, only 14 yards in the second half. So the notes that I have about them getting to that third level of the defense, I thought that Boise State did a great job in the second half versus the run game. I thought that overall they did a strong job of stopping the deep threat. Again, part of that being that they just didn't have the quarterback to be able to make those throws. They did allow 1 deep ball. But Boise State had both of their sacks in this game in the second half. They had, again, they only allowed 14 yards of total rushing in the second half, and they only allowed 3 points. They allowed 10 points in the first half, only 3 points in the second half. So Boise State making the adjustments. We've seen Spencer Danielson and Shenander be able to do that all season long. It's been their strength, is being able to see what the team is doing in the first half and make the adjustments needed in the second half. Teams just don't score well against Boise State in the second. A big part of that because of those adjustments. But there are major reasons for concern. I don't think Oregon State has the ability to necessarily take advantage of them, but we also didn't think Wyoming could either. But my main concern is when we go and face Malik Williams again. When we go and face whoever we face in the playoffs. Now, again, I am hoping that Simpson, whatever his issues is, that he's able to come back. I hope that Tubner and his injuries, I have reason to believe that he'll be back as well. And so I'm hoping that this Boise State defense that we see in the back half of the season, whether in the Mountain West Championship game or in the playoffs, is a Boise State secondary that we started to see really after the Hawaii game, even during the Hawaii game, at least leading up to pretty much the Nevada matchup. Those 3 games there in the middle, where I thought Boise State's defense played really, really well overall in the secondary, was really starting to pick things up. That's what I'm hoping we see after these key players come back. You lose your leader, 2 of your biggest leaders, Simpson and Tubner. You're gonna see the secondary struggle. It's to be expected. However, it's not like that's the first time we've seen them struggle in some form. The struggling has definitely gotten worse after the injuries there. However, there are major causes for concern in this Boise State secondary because it's been a consistent trend all season that Boise State just hasn't been able to fully plug. And there are going to be some teams that, despite whatever adjustments you're able to make in the second half, there are going to be some teams that in the first half, they'll put up enough points. They'll make you regret enough of your mistakes in the first half that you won't be able to make the adjustments needed to win the game in the second half if Boise State is not able to figure out some ways to stop this deep passing game. It's been an issue for the last at least 2 seasons for Boise State, an inability to stop the deep ball, and it really showed today against a team you didn't expect to see it, and that's when it's the most blatant, the most blinding, is when a team that's just not good at it is able to do it against you. It says some things about your ability to go out and stop the deep passing game. So overall, I thought that the Boise State defense had the moments they needed to make up for their mistakes. There was some great individual effort. Ori mentioned some of them. Notarani, obviously 6 tackles, 0.5 tackles for loss. Shea Oladipo had some big plays there, including on the first drive of the second half where he had a big tackle for loss. It was a big part of forcing a punt. Max Steege had a huge sack for him. Been great to see him stepping up this season. The player coming over from Germany. I was so excited about watching his film. It's been awesome to see him stepping up. And then Zion Washington, Ty Benefield, both of them combining for 8 tackles for Benefield and 9 tackles for Zion Washington. So definitely both playing a major role in the secondary for Boise State. But again, it's a secondary that's been having issues, even from some of your best players. McCoy was burnt a couple of times in this game. Gave up a touchdown where he missed a tackle. So you're seeing even your best players starting to struggle. And that's when you have to start wondering about just the mindset. And not necessarily the way that they're approaching the game, but just how is that impacting them? How are these mistakes starting to compound? Is it starting to force them to lose trust potentially in the other players across the field? Are they cheating maybe towards another player's position because just internally, subconsciously, they don't know if that area is going to be covered? All these things are, I mean, I am not saying necessarily that's what is happening, but you are forced to wonder when you start seeing so many deep passes, so many broken coverages given up. And again, it just shows again how important that consistency, like we talked about the offensive line, but that consistency and awareness piece is. You have the greatest individual players, but unless you have that awareness piece together, that's all tied through Tubner in this case, they're going to struggle. So hopefully he's able to come back soon and we see a different Boise State secondary leading into the last Mountain West Championship game and the playoffs. So for this Boise State secondary defense overall, I'm going to give them a B because they did hold Wyoming to 13 points. They were a big part of winning this game. A couple of major moments, but just like we talked about with the offense, there are reasons for concern for this Boise State defense. And that brings us over to the special teams, which has been somewhat of an up and down journey, like a lot of this season for different elements of this team. Special teams has been certainly part of that up and down journey. Even today, James Ferguson Reynolds, incredible performance for him. 5 punts, 48-yard average, 4 punts inside the 20. He had a long today of 62. Yeah, I believe I wrote that right. But he had an incredible game today. He had a couple of punts there that just make you go, wow. He had the run punt option that we've seen at least once so far this season. Saw it again today. He starts running towards the line of scrimmage. The Wyoming defenders collapse. He decides, okay, I'm going to punt it out of there, which he can do because he has those skills from his Aussie rules football. And it's still a 42-yard punt, a 46-yard punt. 46-yard punt on the run towards the line of scrimmage where he toe punches it, and it still goes for 46 yards. He had another just incredible punt that just trickled up inside the 7. The coverage team could have taken a nap and it still wouldn't have rolled into the end zone. Just touches up right there inside the 10. He is really coming into his own here in the second half. He struggled at times a little bit. The injury did not help him. The first half of the season, I thought he played well, but the injury, it took him a little while to get back, but he looks like he's fully healthy, fully able to come back in. And especially it's great as a punter. It's really the one position that benefits from the altitude and the elevation. Punters love kicking in that thin air, and it definitely showed up today. Great performance. I think the season best performance so far for James Ferguson Reynolds. And it was actually factually, it was his best performance. His most punts and longest average total. So 48-yard average and 5. He did have one game where he had a 48-yard average, but we only had one punt in that one. So overall, this was his best performance of the season, and he looked like he was just having fun out there. James Ferguson Reynolds, incredible performance. However, the other key player on this special teams unit that a lot of hopes were rested in coming into the season, and who is factually one of the best kickers in college football history, Jonah Dalmas had a second game where he struggled. His second game in a row back-to-back that he has missed 2 field goals. It's the first time since 2021 that he has missed 2 field goals. In 2021, it took a blocked field goal to count as a miss, to have him have back-to-back missed field goals. So last week, missing a field goal, and this time also. I mean, it wasn't like it was a gimme. It was a 49-yarder, but for Jonah Dalmas, that has been a gimme. He just has looked a little bit off. He's looked rusty. He's looked like he's just not in the right headspace. It is understandable. He's only had I believe it was 13 attempts so far this season, 13 or 14 attempts. I believe he's 11 to 14 right now. The ESPN app hadn't updated when I did this, so I had to kind of do the math from the game, and I assume that I got the numbers right there. So don't quote me on it, but it's somewhere between 10 and 11 makes this season, somewhere between 13 and 14 attempts. But every other season, he's had 20 plus, 24, 26, 23 made field goals, at least going back to his first season with Boise State. He's made a ton of field goals every year because he's been called on a lot. Well, he just hasn't been needed this season as much. Boise State's red zone offense, props to the Dirk Cutter, has done so much better this season. Boise State's had a lot more drives that they've been able to either go for it on fourth down and make the conversion, or just not even get into that situation in the first place. It's definitely been a major improvement for this Boise State offense. So he just hasn't been called on as much, and he's rusty. He just isn't getting the action. So when he does come in, it's been a while since he's kicked a field goal, and the pressure's on, and he knows just kind of subconsciously that he's not going to get very many opportunities to go out and kick. This might be, only time in 3 games that he gets an opportunity to go out and kick a field goal. And I think somewhat maybe the record is hanging over his head as well, and wanting to get to that, but also knowing he's got to capitalize on his opportunities. And I'm not going to say that's a reason he's missing, but when it comes down to field goal kicking, they say field goal kickers are head cases, and every pressure you could possibly imagine is going to build and become part of the whole and reason that potentially there's misses. And so Jonah Dalmas just unfortunately not a great game for him. Again, he's one of the best in Boise State field goal history. I don't think that he is a cause for concern per se. However, if Boise State needs him to go out and win a game, he can do it. He's shown he can do it. However, those back-to-back losses, say Oregon State or UNLV, even if he is able to go out and have an opportunity to go out and win those games, the recent misses are going to weigh on him. No matter how good he is at being able to just focus on one game at a time and forget, that is somewhere in his mind are those recent misses. And so it just adds to the pressure. And so I'm not going to say it's a cause for concern, because Jonah Dalmas is not a cause for concern. Again, one of the best kickers in field goal in Boise State history, and he's still having a very, very good year. However, if Boise State has to go out there and win a game, it at least puts a little bit of a moment of hesitation maybe in the coach's minds. It puts a little moment of hesitation in Jonah Dalmas, and definitely gives the fan base a few extra heart flutters when they have to see Boise State line up and kicks. It has not been automatic this season, and unfortunately for him, hopefully you want to see him be able to kick his way out of it. Really is the only way that you can come out of these slumps, is to get an opportunity to kick a few solid field goals and get that confidence back going. And so you don't want to say hopefully he gets an opportunity, because you don't want Boise State to be forced into field goal kicking options. But if he is given those opportunities versus Oregon State and versus UNLV, hopefully, or Colorado State maybe, but probably UNLV, he is able to make those kicks and get himself out of the slump before the playoffs, and certainly before the Mountain West Championship game. Overall, other notes for this Boise State special teams, they actually did a much better job kicking out of bounds. I know that was a stated concern by the head coaches and an inability to kick the ball out of bounds. They say that every kick they want out of bounds, and they haven't been able to do it. Elevation helping a little bit, the wind helping a little bit today. 2 out of 3 kicks by Boise State this week were out of bounds. The one kick that was not was well covered, 18-yard return down to the 20. Boise State had a nice return from Dylan Riley early on, huge return for 34 yards. He was supposed to be one of my key players of the week, and I just going through, I usually put the defensive player last, and this week the defensive player was Ty Benefield, and so I actually did him second, and I shouldn't have gone out of order because I was like, okay, cool. My brain just like, key player done, move on to the next. I've done the defensive player already, but I actually had him written down to be my third key player of the week. I thought he would have an opportunity to be a contributor because of what we saw last week out of him in the special teams, and he had another nice kick return. He also had a muffed punt. There was a cannon that went off when it shouldn't have, a misfire maybe by Wyoming. And right as he was about to kick it, and maybe that distracted him and caused it. So there were some outside factors, but there was nothing catastrophic happened from it. He was able to push the ball out of bounds. But that was an unfortunate moment, but he did have a nice kick return early. And Boise State overall played really, really well, I thought, in special teams. We saw Cooper Jones back out there at punt returner after Caples had come back in. So maybe Boise State is shifted back over to Cooper Jones. Obviously, Caples had a couple of security issues. Cooper Jones did not, no major returns, but he did also caught every single punt securely, and Boise State was able to make sure they didn't have any negative moments to have to make up for. So overall, special teams performance, going to give it a solid B+, moving in towards an A- territory. I do think that the in a close game like this, it came down to 4 points. The missed field goal is big, but again, it wasn't like it was an automatic, and James Ferguson Reynolds had a very, very nice game overall. So solid B+ performance for the special teams. All right, finally here, wrapping up. Key number 1 was establish the offensive line. Boise State did look like they were attempting to force the run at times, to really focus in on the running game. And unfortunately, there were some nice moments, but overall, the offensive line, again, just the issues and the constant rotations because of the injuries, it showed today, and we've gone into it in depth, but I think a stout offensive line, probably a C+. Shut down the Wyoming running game. Wyoming was able to run pretty well in this game, especially in the first half. I did think that they played better there in the second half. So I'm going to give that a B-. Statistically, overall, they held them to 116 yards rushing. However, again, there are some reasons for concern there. Boise State needs to find a better way of plugging those run holes, at least early in these first halves. So B- performance for the shutdown of the Wyoming run game. And then find the deep ball, F. Unfortunately, Boise State didn't even try today. A couple mid-range type passing opportunities, but no even shots deep. Maybe you count the very last play of the game for Boise State, a kind of deep ball attempt to Cam Camper, a little bit underthrown, unfortunately. Could have been a touchdown, make this a 2-score game, a little bit nicer for the committee. However, just not actually really part of the offensive play calling repertoire for this Boise State offense in this game. So, where's Boise State stand right now? Well, the good news is that they won. And because they won, they get to reap the benefits of one of the craziest weeks of college football that we've seen. And I've said that a couple of times this season. This has been one of the craziest seasons overall. There's been so much parity across college football because of the transfer portal and because of NIL. The complete opposite of what all the elites wanted you to think. This has actually been a very, very close season where really anybody could beat anybody. We saw that this week. And so Boise State's not the only top team that's fading a little bit down the stretch. The difference is Boise State's finding ways to win. Was not able to say the same for number 5 Indiana, who lost big to Ohio State. Number 9 Ole Miss, who lost to a 6-win Florida team that the whole fan base wants their head coach fired. A number 7 Alabama lost huge, just catastrophic loss to Oklahoma, who is also only a 6-5 program. Texas A&M, number 15, they lost to Auburn in overtime. It was a really, really close game and a 41 to 43 point loss, but they're out. And then BYU, some bigger news here as far as kind of the playoff race goes. BYU losing to Arizona State, 23 to 28. And then Colorado losing to Kansas, which was huge for Boise State, 21 to 37. And then as far as the group of fives go, Army losing to Notre Dame. And so Boise State even despite everything that we saw today, after this week, they have now win out and locked up the number 4 slot. Winning out is key. You have to win out, and it's not a guarantee, especially with the warning signs that we've seen in this game. However, if they win out, they have locked up the 4th highest ranked conference champion. The Big 12 is not going to be able to come back into it after what we saw this week. Even if Boise State wins like they did tonight, these close wins, it will still be enough to push them into the 4th highest rank, to maintain their hold on the 4th highest rank. And the craziest thing is, even despite what we saw tonight, they might move up. You had 2 teams that are certainly going to fall out of the ranking in Ole Miss and Alabama. There's going to be no way that they're going to be able to keep them in front of Boise State. They'll definitely be out. Indiana also might get the BYU treatment after their first loss because of how weak the schedule has been and how little respect the committee has had for Indiana. They might potentially, I actually expect with how many other teams lost, that they will fall forward, that they will maintain potentially their spot in the top 10. However, there is only one team that won behind Boise State who you could say is close enough and big enough win to jump the Broncos in SMU. I think SMU will jump Boise State, but I expect Boise State to move up at least 1 spot to number 11, if not 2 spots to number 10, which would be crazy considering the game that we just saw. It is truly unfortunate for Boise State that they were not able to fully capitalize on this moment. Colorado goes down. Travis Hunter has a really big game. He played really, really well. But Colorado loses. If Ashton Jeanty had an equally big game, 200-plus yards rushing like we expected him to have in this matchup, I think it would have been enough to take the lead in the Heisman race. Boise State, if they had destroyed Wyoming by 40-plus points like a lot of people expected them to, not necessarily me, but a lot of people expected them to, with everything else that happened, I think you could have seen them definitely get into the top 10. Maybe even number 9 would have been on the table, I think. I think you could have made a case for a Boise State team with a 10-1 record and a crushing of Wyoming, showing that the last 2 weeks have been a fluke and they're no longer struggling, that they could have had a case for being ranked ahead of Indiana. I think you could have seen that. It'll be interesting to see what the CFP committee comes out with. Boise State definitely not fully capitalizing. However, they won, and that is the most important factor. But while fans should celebrate, like I said at the beginning of this video, they should celebrate the win, this is definitely a team that has a lot of issues they need to fix. Is not finishing the season strong so far, and they need a big game versus Oregon State. They need a big game, not necessarily for their rankings of playoff hopes like we just talked about. Win out. You've locked up that 4th spot. I think you'll be inside the top 11, top 12, certainly for Boise State. It could even end up solidly inside of the top 10, especially after what happened this week. Win out and you're good. However, if Boise State wants to come into the playoff strong, if they want to be able to play the way that they need to in the Mountain West to prevent UNLV from bringing off the upset, they need to find confidence. We're going to talk about it in the preview video for Oregon State, but they need to find confidence. They need to play confidently. It's not like they're playing not to lose, but they definitely aren't playing free and loose. They need that big game that allows them to reestablish themselves like we saw early on in the season, where they're willing to do anything because they know that it's going to be successful. We're not seeing the same approach that we've seen earlier on in the season, and I think the pressure of the moment is starting to weigh on them. A big game versus Oregon State would allow them to regain that confidence going into the Mountain West Championship game. So I look forward to the preview for Oregon State. It'll be coming out in the next couple of days. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, go Big Blue!